Hello and welcome to this strategic update from Lifecare. We have the pleasure of having CEO Joachim Holter here joining us. So just go ahead and do your presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting and having us and hosting this. I'm happy, of course, to be able to present Lifecare's updated strategic position, where we, of course, are building on what we have presented earlier, but we are also now in a position where we want to also look ahead and say something about the numbers that we are envisioning going into the future. So just to recap and start with the company itself, we are a medtech company with a high growth opportunity. We are positioned within the next generation of diabetes medtech, meaning that we are looking into the continuous glucose monitor area with implantable monitors. The total CGM market is at around $5 billion addressable. However, we are aiming obviously not to catch all of this, but to catch a significant portion of the implantable part of the CGM opportunity. We have outlined a capital efficient pathway towards our commercialization that includes also near-term value inflection points. And we are also now, we believe, in a position to enhance the fact that we are a second mover in this industry. One thing is that there is a lot of existing continuous glucose monitors out there, the wearables, body-worn CGMs. We are following up after Eversense to be the second implantable version. And the second mover advantage is related to the fact that they have already gone through the regulatory pathway. We see that as an advantage for us. And also we'll come into the potential that we have calculated at the peak level to be around $1 billion. Based both on our legacy, the fact that the inventor of our technology was the father of a patient with diabetes, but also based on the positioning in the society today, we believe that the diabetes market is extremely interesting from a commercial perspective. It's a $1 trillion healthcare challenge worldwide, and new numbers from the International Diabetes Federation state that approximately 600 million people today live with diabetes worldwide, of which approximately 110 million are in the need of continued glucose monitoring. Diabetes as such are of course a dramatic disease to have for the ones impacted, also causing a death every 6th second, meaning more than 3.4 million deaths in 2024 globally. At this stage, we are at the tipping point for continuous glucose monitoring devices because one thing is that the patients are just increasing, that the number of diabetes patients are increasing. And also we saw last year in 2024 that more than 2 million new type 1 users started with CGMs in a global setting. But also the fact that the American Diabetes Association are now recommending CGM use for patients with type 2, meaning that the scope of patients are increasing. In addition to this, we also expect that patients with pre-diabetes, patients within the lifestyle segment, and also our vision to go into the veterinary market will strongly affect the patient population going forward into numbers that are more than addressable for us as a company. Continuous glucose monitors have become the standard care for diabetes management. Starting in the 1970s, patients were able to prick their fingers to get a blood measurement. That has been the standard of care up till the later years. However, still there is a majority of patients with diabetes in the world who are doing finger pricking, but starting in around the millennium, the first continuous glucose monitor were approved by the FDA, and from that point off, more and more patients are starting to use body-worn CGMs. But the future, we believe, of continuous glucose monitors are within the implantable segment from a position of inject and forget, to be able to inject your continuous glucose monitor so that it's not visible neither for the patient or for the surroundings, and also implying that the longevity that we are at will be a important part of the future diabetes care. Continuous glucose monitors as such is the fastest growing diabetes technology segment, with a 12.5 annual growth estimated from 2022 to 2030. That brings us into a market opportunity, if we isolate North America and Europe, in 2035 of $30 billion. If we look then at the implantable part of the CGMs, this is set to be the fastest growing segment within this technology going forward. The starting point as of today is rather limited, as you will see here on the 2025 numbers. That is, of course, the market share of Eversense as of today. But we expect that both the market share of Eversense and also when Lifecare is brought to the market, this will explode into a market opportunity in the same geographic setting of more than $5 billion in 2035. As I've spoken a bit about the future of CGM, and I just want to explain what sets Lifecare apart from the existing solutions. And I think that the first thing is, as mentioned, the difference between having a wearable, a body-worn CGM that you have to change every 7 to 15 days, with a glucose oxidator technology and the need for quite rapid calibrations. We are bringing to market a implantable version that will last for a minimum of 180 days. We are aiming to increase this into years, and our goal going from 180 days is to go into 550 days, meaning 1.5 years, with our small capsule based on osmotic pressure, where we do not need a daily calibration as you see on the devices out there today. And of course, important to mention the MARD that you will see at the bottom here, the fact that to be able to do clinical decisions, you need to have a mean average relative difference of 10%, meaning that the difference between a blood capillary test at the hospital and your device is less than 10%. We have shown to have that in our first human study, as do, of course, all of our competitors. That's a must to go into the actual market. We have an advantage based on the fact that we are using the osmotic pressure as the sensing principle. This allows us to provide high accuracy and convertibility because the osmotic pressure is 100% linked to glucose variations. This is a proven and interference resistance technology. We have a high stability, and we have shown that through over years in our in vitro testings in the laboratory, and also now in vivo tests, both in humans and in animals. And we are able to provide a very long frictionless performance with our technology. We do not see 550 days as the end point. We do believe that we are able to bring this solution into a significantly longer longevity than what we see today and what we also aim for in our next version. To translate the market growth into value for our shareholders, we have calculated with the assumption that the implantable segment of the CGMs will be able to penetrate approximately 15% of the total addressable market. And given the fact that we are the second mover in this race, we believe that we should be able to grab 25% of the market share in a foreseeable future. This will bring us into a base case peak revenue of a little less than $1 billion with the potential for more. If we kind of put this into a timeline, we envision to do that in the 2030s. But I also want to highlight the fact that we envision this and expect this to be a sustainable revenue. This will not be a peak and then going down because of the fact that the number of diabetes patients are increasing. but also the fact that we are increasing within the scope of diabetes patients. Both type 2 and pre-diabetes patients are within our target going forward, but also the lifestyle segment, meaning non-diabetic patients that want to measure their glucose level. So we do not see any decrease from the peak level. That will be a stable peak going forward. In addition, of course, to our most important, by far most important mission to go into the human diabetes market, we also see a potential to go into the pet market. The reason for doing that is there are several reasons to do that. The most important thing is that going into the veterinary market will give us a very important user feedback from the users, meaning their animals and their owners, in our product development. And we can do that at an early stage because there is a very limited regulatory path in front of us to go into the veterinary market. The regulations are much softer. We are taking advantage of our development, meaning that we are taking our product for humans and using that into the veterinary market. We are not challenging our timelines towards the human market. On the contrary, all decisions made towards the veterinary market are aligned with our aim to go into the human market as quick as possible. And this will give us a positive impact on the human market readiness, but we also see that there is quite a significant revenue opportunity. We expect that to be in the peak of $40 million, also here calculating in the North American market and the European market. And we see, and the aim is to go into this market this year. So that's a near-term value inflection point for Lifecare. We have a focused and capital-efficient path to our commercialization that we have been following for years now. We have done our key developments to date. Most important is the fact that our first human study confirms a high degree of accuracy, and also the fact that the biocompatibility and longevity studies that we are doing show good results on an ongoing basis. For 2025, we do expect to be able to launch our pre-CE study. So we will do a small study before we go into the actual CE study. That will be our pivotal study to be able to get the CE mark in 2026. And from that point off, we expect to go into a market launch for humans in 2027. On the way, as already mentioned, we will do an initial launch in the veterinary market in 2025, and then move on to a full launch veterinary in 2026. The aim is to do this with a global partner within the veterinary market. And from that point off, in 2026, we will go to US launch preparations, both for veterinary and also then for the human market in 2027. We have built a scalable and partner-driven business-to-business model where we have focused on enabling fast ramp-up. The important thing, it's important for Lifecare to emphasize the fact that all of our sensor R&D and design development, as well as the production and assembly of the product, is an in-house value of Lifecare. We own those processes, and we aim to continue to be a producer of our technology going forward. While we aim to leave it to a partner to do the ramp up of the sales and the marketing, obviously that makes sense because it's a costly thing to do to build sales and marketing. The other thing is that it's not only a question of money, it's also a question of competence. We want to focus on what we are good at, and that is to do sensor R&D and design development, as well as production and assembly, and then leave it to partners to do the continued sales and marketing efforts. I have one slide here where I want to show how our capital use going forward this year, next year, and in 2027 looks. And as you see, in 2026, we will have a slight increase in capital use that is related to increased costs of regulatory trials. And you will see in 2027 that we're then down at the OPEX level, meaning that there will be only a limited R&D effort going forward, and we will then be more or less market ready. We aim to be market ready in 2027. The financing of this is already solved when it comes to 2025, to the extent that we're expecting some subscriptions in our upcoming warrant period that starts the 2nd of June. And so the capital need for 2025, we are quite confident that that is okay. But we see that from next year, we still need some equity. But from 2027, we do expect to get revenue contributions that will reduce the need for external capital. We also plan for strategic capital in 2026. Strategic capital in the meaning of investment loans from state authorities, etc. Our ambitions on a short term is to be able to, in 2030, impact and scale our profitability and then end up at an annual revenue of more than 200 million from 2030. This is a focused approach based on what we see as a addressable market and a ramp up that is planned and reasonable. So to get into the point of 200 million annual revenue, we need to build a patient group of 75,000 by 2030 with an EBITDA market that is reasonable. But the interesting thing is that this will only impact 0.5% of the total share of the CGM market, meaning that the upside is obviously huge from this point off. But building from R&D design into production and sales is, of course, a complex venture. Hence, we don't want to overshoot in our ambitions, but we see that the upside is extreme. And as I mentioned earlier, we see that we have a peak revenue potential of around $1 billion in the 2030s. And I can be a bit more specific. It's in the first half of the 2030s. So the ambitions is, of course, increasing from this point off. Furthermore, on a longer term perspective, we are building a platform for more than the addressable market as of today in US and in Europe. We want to add geographies. The increase of diabetes is quite extreme in other parts of the world beyond North America and Europe. And obviously, we want to take part of the potential there. We also want to expand the scope of patients, as already mentioned, and to build a platform where we can also explore our technology to do other monitoring exercises than glucose, meaning that we, as an example, want to go into potentially lactate or calcium or other body analytes that are of interest to have measured for different patient groups. To do this, we already have built an experienced and proven team that are driving Lifecare forward with employees in Bergen, Norway, where our headquarters are, and also in Mainz, Germany, and in Bristol, UK. Our production facility is set up in Mainz as of today, but in a couple of weeks, we will take over a bigger production facility and start to build for a scalable production in Germany going forward. So to wrap it up, how are we going to transform the diabetes care? Well, we are going into the market with the next generation of CGMs with a production innovation and based on already a substantial investment, but also a development for the company. On that basis, we will address the huge market of $5 billion annually, with the near-term value inflection points based on a capital-efficient path, and look forward to the peak revenue point in the 2030s. Thank you very much.
All right, Joachim. Thank you for a very good and interesting presentation.
Thank you.
I received some questions here online. First off, you touched on this in the presentation, but maybe you could repeat it. What is the timeline for expected launch, both in the veterinary and human market?
Mm-hmm. expected launch timeline for the veterinary market is 2025. So end of year is, of course, the end of that aim. We are quite confident that we will be able to get into the market this year. The plan is to start in the Nordics, start in Norway, potentially expand it to Sweden and Denmark if we see the need for that. But of course, we expect that our launch will be a trigger also for the future partnership discussions. We are already doing partnership discussions, but to show the result of a market launch is expected to also be a significant trigger point if we don't have a partner already at that point of time. We also, in parallel with this, as the most important, we are doing now our preparations to our upcoming round of clinical studies. We expect to be able to provide some news on that within very short time. And the reason for that focus is, of course, that we have to do clinical trials to build a technical file so that we can claim the CE mark. We aim to claim the CE mark for human use by end of 2026 so that we can go to the human market in 2027.
2027. Right. And it's obviously a huge market, but also quite few players in the CGM market. Could you elaborate a bit on the competition landscape and the uniqueness with Sencell?
The competition level is fragmented, I would say. And the easy approach to it is to say that 99% of the market is held by 3 large American entities. Abbott, Dexcom, and Medtronic. The biggest runner-up is probably, if we look in a Western world approach, is Eversense. They hold less than 0.5% of the market as of today. And then there is an increased amount of companies coming out of Asia, especially China, but Asia as a whole, where we see that they are using the same technologies as Abbott, Dexcom, and Medtronic, with wearable body-worn CGMs with a limited duration. There is, of course, not much market data available for China. If we kind of are able to speculate a bit around that, I believe that some of the Chinese players are closer to Abbott and Dexcom if we look in size, but those data are not very much available. Our uniqueness is the fact that we are implantable with a very long duration. So while you have the existing technologies, wearables, on the body, where you have to change it after maximum 15 days, depending on your supplier, we have an implantable design where you can have it under the skin for a minimum of 6 months, hopefully several years before you have to change it.
Yeah. And on that note, what is the time frame for developing this next generation, which could last even 1.5 years?
I think that I think it's fair to first of all, we are focusing on getting our first product out.
Yeah.
And putting out setting out the goal of 0.5 year is something that we are going to continue to talk about until we have data that supports longer duration. But the important thing is that we don't see in our physics or in our chemistry of the implant that we have a degradation of the actual technology. So all technologies degrade over time. That's a mere fact. We don't see that we have any a special degradation. Hence, we do expect that we already with today's technology can have a long duration, but I don't have the data to support it. Hence, I'm going to stick on 6 months and say that our goal is to make it last longer.
Yeah, perfect. Which geographical markets will be prioritized?
Europe. We're going into the European market first. We are a European company. We are located in Norway and in the heart of Europe, Germany. And so that has been our plan all the way. Of course, the expectations is that we go towards the the American market from that point of. That makes sense because the amount of health expenditures in the US is enormous. So there's an interesting market from a capital perspective. On the other side, if we kind of look a bit more east, or let's say southeast, and go through the Middle East, North Africa, India, to the Pacific region, there are 400 million people with diabetes in this region. Hence, it is an interesting market to look towards. The question is what of course the price points there, etc. But I think that to go both to the North American market and also look towards the Pacific market, etc., is of interest for us going forward.
Do you think you could launch there based on data from the European study that you?
As soon as we have a CE mark, we can expect that it's possible to get a regulatory approval in those countries, or those countries. That's in those regions. So with the CE mark, it's easier. Yes.
Yeah. When could one expect a partnership to take place? Near term, or is it a few years down the road?
I think that coming back to the launch, veterinary launch, I think that's going to be an accelerator. And I think that first of all, when we go to the veterinary market, that's going to prove our potential. That's going to prove that we actually are able to execute what we promised to execute. That's going to definitely trigger interest in the veterinary industry. But I do believe that also is going to trigger some interest in the human industry. And at some point, if in time, and I'm not convinced it's very in the very far future. The existing CGM companies will, of course, have to take seriously the fact that not only one, but several implantable technologies are coming into the market. So I'm not convinced that we will get into a real partnership discussion this year, but I would expect that 2026 and 2027 are going to be interesting years in that perspective.
All right, exciting. And you mentioned a need of additional equity from 2026. How much?
We calculate that we from now and until 2027, we calculate that we need approximately 150 million Norwegian kroner, equivalent to Swedish kroners these days.
Right. And the ambitions for 2030, is this attributable only to the human market, or does these figures also include the pet?
That is based merely on the human market.
Yeah.
We have not put in calculations on the veterinary market there. No.
Right. Perfect. And what do you believe will be the driving force behind implantable CGM gaining traction over the traditional CGMs?
I think, first of all, I'm convinced that a lot of people will continue to use traditional CGMs. But it's a question of being able to choose between different technologies. Some will prefer to have an implantable. Some will prefer to have a body worn that you change every 15 days or so. So I think that's kind of the potential to choose. I think it's important. But also emphasizing the fact that we are calculating with a 15% technology penetration for implantables.
Yeah.
And I think that's a conservative assumption going forward.
Yeah. And what do you believe is the most important USP for a CGM system? Is it accuracy? Is it convenience? What is the most important thing, given that everything is like?
I can only speculate on that because that depends on who you ask, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, from a clinician's point of view, of course, accuracy. Then from that, you want to have as accurate measurements as possible, and that will probably also be the case for especially the type 1 diabetes patients, because for them, this is a question of life and death. On the other hand, when you're used to kind of treating the disease, convenience is also probably increasingly important.
Mm.
So I think that the combination of convenience and accuracy is the kind of the best answer I can give.
Yeah. Given that you have a certain level of accuracy, I guess, then convenience is more.
Yeah, and of course, when we look into the veterinary market, when we look into the lifestyle market, convenience is more important than accuracy, I assume.
Yeah, yeah. And what will be your go-to-market strategy in the pet market? Are you launching this through a partner or yourself?
Our plan is to launch it ourselves. We will be happy to do it with a partner, obviously, but looking at the timeline, we expect to do it ourselves, and we are positioned to do so. It's important to also say that to go into the veterinary market is probably a bit easier than to go into the human market, based on the fact that you have veterinary chains all over Europe, right? So it's basically an easier sale B2B and not the B2C sale. So that's our position there.
Yeah. And you mentioned that no calibration is needed for your CGM Sensel compared to Eversense. Can you talk a little bit on how big of a USP this is for the patient?
Yeah, and then again, once again, I have to kind of position myself into a patient perspective. And of course, if you have a CGM that is either body worn or injectable, but you still have to calibrate it 1 to 2 times a day, that is inconvenient. But that assures, of course, the patient that that the results are solid. That's a good thing. But coming back to the convenience point, to reduce the number of calibrations is probably the key for patients to be able to really inject and forget, to only get their alarm when they need it or their readout when they need it, and they don't have to kind of do the cumbersome calibration things, pricking their finger and do the calculations and put in the new numbers. So I think that to have a calibration-free system will be quite a good selling point. However, that will also depend on regulatory approval, whether regulatory authorities will accept that you don't do any calibrations on the way. Yeah.
Right. And you spoke a little bit about the 35% EBITDA margin that you target. What gross margins do you believe you could reach? I mean, you have a pretty low production cost, and you say that $4,000 annually could be a potential price. What is the gross margins going to be like if you speculate?
I'm not sure I want to speculate around that, because we have provided kind of an insight in how we calculate, how we see the future in terms of at least revenue, and then we can have some ideas around the profitability on that basis, based on the EBITDA margin. But I don't think it's fair to kind of go from those indications and into a guiding.
Yeah.
That is basically too early for us.
Yeah, makes sense. And as I said, you assume the price tag here at the USD 4,000 per year for Sensel. What is this built on, and why is it not the same as Eversense or even a premium if you could deliver even better lifetime for the sensor?
Yeah, I think that is an important question, and a good question. But as you remember, this is our assumption. We don't have in-house the kind of the understanding of the cost potential for users. We have not built that kind of department, right? So we don't know too much about reimbursement. We don't know too much about price sensitivity. That is something where we will rely on a partner to go forward. We assume that a cost in between the more affordable and the highest level, which is Eversense and some Dexcom sensors, are a way to go into our calculations. Then again, of course, first movers often want to pay more, right? So that will be subject to discussions with our partners in a strategic approach going forward. I 100% agree with you. If we bring something much better to the market, we should be more expensive. And I'm quite convinced that that's going to be the case in the future. However, we are here today and in our updated presentation, trying to give insight in how we're thinking and how we're calculating, and we are focusing on doing our calculations on a conservative basis.
Yeah, that's a good thing to do.
But it's still I mean, our conservative assumptions are giving us a revenue potential that is very, very interesting for the company and hopefully also for our shareholders.
Yeah, absolutely. So last question, maybe you could wrap it up with the most important triggers in 2025 for the company.
The most important triggers for us now is to finalize our design freeze for the implant, so that we can go from that point and into our pre-regulatory studies. And as I've already mentioned, it's not far away. That's our first important trigger point. The next important trigger point will, of course, or milestone will of course be to execute this study, the first study, and to file for the CE study, and to go into the market launch for veterinary.
Yeah, and that will be end of the year, I guess.
It will be by within end of 2025. Yes, I'm not going to indicate when, but of course, the end of year is the end of year.
Yeah. Okay, Joachim, thank you very much for coming and for the presentation.
Thank you.